The first time Greta Schmidt held the tin cup of coffee in her hands, she thought it was a trick. The steam rose in delicate spirals, carrying with it the rich, dark aroma of real coffee, not the acorn substitute, not the burnt barley water, not the chicory sludge that had passed for coffee in Germany for the past 3 years. Real coffee. Her hands trembled. The cup was warm, genuinely warm, and the heat seeped into her frozen fingers like a memory of something she'd forgotten existed. She brought it to her lips, tasted it, and then, to her absolute horror and shame, Greta began to cry. Not quiet tears, not dignified sniffles. Deep, wrenching sobs that shook her entire body, there in the mess hall of an American POW camp in Virginia, surrounded by 40 other German women who were also weeping into their coffee cups like children. The American guards watched in bewildered silence. They had expected many reactions to captivity: fear, anger, defiance, perhaps resignation. What they had not expected was for a simple cup of morning coffee to break these women completely. But the guards didn't understand. They couldn't understand. Because that cup of coffee wasn't just a beverage. It was proof, devastating, undeniable proof, that everything these women had been told, everything they had believed, everything they had sacrificed for, had been a lie. April 1945. The war in Europe was collapsing like a building imploding from within. Greta Schmidt had been a secretary at the Wehrmacht communications office in Frankfurt. 28 years old, blonde hair always pinned neatly beneath her cap, fingers stained with typewriter ink from transcribing orders she never questioned. She had believed, truly believed, in the 1,000-year Reich, in victory, in sacrifice for the fatherland. When the Americans came, she had burned the files as instructed and waited with the other women to be executed. That's what they'd been told would happen. The propaganda had been clear. American soldiers were brutal, lawless savages who showed no mercy to German women. Instead, she was processed, tagged, loaded onto a ship with hundreds of other female prisoners, nurses, radio operators, clerks, telephone switchboard workers, and transported across an ocean she'd only seen in newsreels. The voyage had been a nightmare of seasickness and terror, crammed into the holds of converted cargo ships, waiting for the violence they'd been promised. It never came. Instead, when they disembarked at a port in Virginia, they were given medical examinations, deloused, issued clean prison uniforms, and transported to a camp that looked nothing like what they'd imagined. Barracks 7 housed 42 German women, ranging in age from 19 to 53. They came from different cities, different backgrounds, different levels of belief in the regime they had served. But they all shared one thing: they were starving. Not just physically, though most had lost 20, 30, even 40 pounds during the final months of the war. They were starving in their souls, hollowed out by years of propaganda that had fed them hatred instead of truth, slogans instead of substance. The camp sat in a clearing surrounded by Virginia pine forests. The barracks were wooden but solid. Each woman had a bunk with a real mattress, a pillow, a blanket. There were showers with hot water, toilets that flushed. These basic amenities, things the American guards took completely for granted, left the German women stunned into silence. Margarete Klein, a nurse from Hamburg who'd worked in a field hospital during the siege of Berlin, had spent her last weeks in Germany sleeping in a bombed-out cellar, eating boiled nettles and potato peels, treating wounded soldiers with bandages made from newspaper. The first time she used a flush toilet in the American camp, she stood in the bathroom stall and wept. Anna Richter, a radio operator from Dresden, had watched her entire city burn. She had crawled through rubble searching for her mother's body and never found it. When she arrived at the camp and was handed a bar of soap, real soap, white and fragrant, she held it to her face and sobbed like a child. These women had been conditioned to expect brutality. What they received instead was something far more devastating: order, cleanliness, routine. And every morning hot coffee. The bell rang at 6 a.m. on their first full day in camp. Greta woke disoriented, her heart pounding with the old fear: air raid sirens, incoming shells, the whistling descent of bombs. But there was only the clanging of a simple morning bell and the sound of women stirring in their bunks. "Breakfast," announced one of the American guards, a young woman in crisp military uniform who spoke careful German with an accent. "Line up outside. Single file." The women shuffled out into the cool morning air, blinking in the pale dawn light. Dew covered the grass. Birds sang in the trees. It was so quiet. No artillery thunder. No aircraft engines. No screaming. They were led to the mess hall, a long wooden building with rows of tables and benches. The smell hit them before they even entered, the rich, overwhelming aroma of food. Real food. The serving line was orderly. American cooks, some male, some female, including several black soldiers, which shocked the German women into staring, dished out portions with mechanical efficiency. Oatmeal, toast with butter, a boiled egg, a small sausage, and coffee. A full tin cup of steaming black coffee. Greta accepted her tray with trembling hands. The weight of it alone was staggering. More food than she'd seen in months compiled into a single meal. She found a seat at one of the long tables, setting the tray down carefully as if it might disappear. Around her, the other women sat in stunned silence, staring at their food like it was a mirage. Margarethi, the nurse, picked up her fork and then set it down again, unable to move. "Is it poisoned?" whispered Anna, the radio operator. "Don't be stupid," hissed another woman. "Why would they poison us after bringing us all this way? Then why are they feeding us?" Anna's voice cracked. "We're the enemy. We're prisoners. This doesn't make sense." Greta lifted the cup of coffee to her lips. The first sip was transcendent. It was hot. It was bitter. It was real. It tasted like civilization, like normalcy, like 1,000 mornings in her mother's kitchen before the war, when the world made sense and coffee was just coffee, not a luxury reserved for party officials. The second sip broke something inside her. Her throat constricted. Her eyes burned. And then the tears came, hot, shameful, unstoppable. Across the table, Margarethi was crying into her oatmeal, her shoulders shaking. Anna had buried her face in her hands, the untouched coffee cup sitting before her. All around the mess hall, German women were weeping. Some cried silently, tears streaming down their faces as they stared at their trays. Others sobbed openly, gasping for breath between convulsive waves of emotion. The American guards stood along the walls, watching in complete bafflement. One young guard leaned toward his sergeant. "What the hell is happening?" The sergeant, an older man who'd fought in North Africa, shook his head slowly. "I don't know, son. I honestly don't know." But Greta knew. She knew with the terrible clarity of someone whose entire worldview had just shattered. The coffee was real. The food was real. The kindness, cold and bureaucratic though it was real. And that meant everything else had been a lie. After breakfast, the women were assigned to their first work details. Light labor, laundry duty, kitchen assistance, groundskeeping. Nothing strenuous. Greta was assigned to the camp administration office to help translate documents. Her English was serviceable, learned in school before the war, rusty but functional. As she worked, sorting through forms and requisition orders, she kept touching the pocket of her uniform where she'd hidden a photograph. It was a picture of her younger brother, Klaus. 17 years old, drafted into the Volkssturm during the desperate final defense of Berlin. She didn't know if he was alive or dead. The last letter she'd received from her mother, smuggled through before her capture, had been written on the back of a ration card in pencil so faint she could barely read it. "We have no food. Klaus has not returned. The Russians are coming. I pray you are safe wherever you are." Please, if you can, send bread. Anything. We are starving. That letter had arrived 3 weeks ago. And now Greta sat in an American POW camp, her stomach full of oatmeal and real coffee, while her mother dug through rubble for potato peels. The guilt was physically painful, a constant ache in her chest that made it hard to breathe. She wasn't alone in this torment. That evening after dinner, another overwhelming meal of beef stew, bread, and vegetables. The women gathered in Barracks 7, sitting on their bunks in the dim lamplight. No one spoke for a long time. Finally, Anna broke the silence. My sister's children are eating wallpaper paste, she said quietly, staring at her hands. She wrote me before I was captured. They were boiling the paste off the walls to eat because it has some wheat in it. My mother weighs less than 40 kilograms, added another woman, Frida, who'd been a clerk in Munich. She sent me a photograph. I didn't recognize her. Margarethi, the nurse, spoke without looking up. In Berlin during the final weeks we ran out of anesthetic. We ran out of bandages. We ran out of everything. I performed amputations with soldiers screaming because we had nothing to give them for the pain. And I ate better than most because medical staff got extra rations. Half a potato. A slice of bread with mold cut off. The barracks was silent except for quiet weeping. And here, Anna said, her voice breaking, here they give us coffee every morning. Real coffee. Like we're human beings who deserve it. Maybe that's the cruelty, whispered Greta. Maybe they want us to know. To understand what we've lost. What we were lied to about. The Americans aren't starving, Frida said. Did you see the guards? Did you see how they look? Healthy. Strong. Their uniforms fit them properly because they're not disappearing inside their clothes. The cooks threw away food today, said Anna in disbelief. I saw it. Leftover bread. They threw it in a waste bin. Bread. The implications hung in the air, too terrible to fully articulate. Germany had told them they were fighting for survival against enemies who wanted to destroy them. Germany had demanded total sacrifice. Every scrap of food, every able body, every last measure of devotion. And all the while, their enemies across the ocean had been living in abundance so complete they threw away bread. The coffee came every morning. Like clockwork. Like a religious ritual. Like proof. 6 a.m. bell. Line up. Mess hall. The same smells, the same routine, the same tin cup placed in each woman's hands by the same American cooks who never smiled but never sneered either. Just coffee. Just breakfast. Just another day. But for the women of Barracks 7, each morning was a fresh devastation. Greta developed a technique. She would wrap her hands around the cup, feeling its warmth, preparing herself for the flood of emotion she knew was coming. Then she would take that first sip, let the tears come quietly, and try to eat her breakfast before the grief overwhelmed her completely. Some mornings were worse than others. On the morning a letter arrived telling Anna that her father had died of starvation. She sat at the breakfast table holding her coffee cup and wept for 20 minutes straight while the other women sat around her in helpless solidarity. On the morning Margarethi received word that her hospital in Hamburg had been bombed and all her colleagues killed, she couldn't even lift the cup. She just stared at it, her face gray, until another prisoner gently guided her hand to help her drink. The American guards stopped trying to understand. They just let the women cry. It's the damnedest thing, one guard told another during a shift change. Every single morning like clockwork. They eat, they drink their coffee, and they fall apart. Captain says let them be. Crying ain't against regulations. Ain't natural though. It's just coffee. But it wasn't just coffee. It was the moment each day when these women confronted the unbearable truth. They had been expendable to the regime they served, while they were being treated with basic human dignity by the enemy they'd been taught to hate. Every cup of coffee was an indictment. Every warm sip was evidence in a trial they couldn't escape. Guilty. guilty of believing, guilty of not questioning, guilty of surviving while others starved. 6 weeks into their captivity, something began to shift. The crying continued, but conversations started afterward. Quiet, intense discussions that lasted late into the night in Barracks 7. "Why do they treat us this way?" Frida asked one evening. "If we were in their position, if we had captured American women, would we have done the same?" The question hung unanswered because they all knew the truth. "My supervisor at the communications office," Greta said slowly, "she told me once that prisoners were a waste of resources. That feeding prisoners took food from German children." She said it proudly, like it was logical. "We weren't taught to see enemies as human," Margaretti added. "We were taught to see them as threats. Inferior. Dangerous. And yet here we sit," Anna gestured around the barracks, "in clean beds with full stomachs, guarded by people who could punish us but don't." "The Geneva Conventions," said Frida, who'd been reading the camp regulations posted in English and German. "They follow rules. International law. They treat prisoners according to a standard." "Germany signed those conventions too," Greta pointed out quietly. The implication didn't need to be stated. As the weeks turned into months, the women began to see things they couldn't unsee. They noticed that the American guards, including the black soldiers, which had initially shocked them, were treated as equals in a way that seemed impossible according to everything Nazi ideology had taught them about racial hierarchy. They noticed that female American soldiers held positions of authority and the men followed their orders without question. They noticed that the camp operated on rules, not fear.